Welcome back to the show. I'm Faraz Siddiqi, and I'll be breaking down the most ambiguous backfields in the NFL and which running backs from those backfields should we be targeting and avoiding for fantasy football. Let's start with the Miami Dolphins. Great run scheme. You want a piece of this offense for fantasy. They were 6th in rushing yards, and 3 of the 4 teams in the top 6 had some sort of rushing output from their starting quarterback. The Dolphins did not. It was all Devon Achane and Raheem Mostert. And now they added another running back in the mix with Jalen Wright. They liked him so much that they gave up a 3rd rounder in next year's draft just to move up into the 4th round and grab him. However, given the fact that Mike McDaniel just said that Mostert is leading that room still, I'm expecting this to remain a Mostert-Achane duo for now. I don't expect this to be a 3-man backfield. Running backs just don't get into any sort of rhythm like that. So a duo makes the most sense, and that's how I see Mike McDaniel handling the situation. Now, we've seen Achane get hurt last year, and he's a smaller back. We've seen Mostert get hurt on numerous occasions during his career, and he's 32 years old. So there's a decent chance we see Jalen Wright get some work in some capacity this year. And if he does, I would probably want him in my lineup, even if one of the other backs are healthy and good to go, because I just don't think we see a workhorse type of game for any of these backs at any point this year, assuming at least 2 of them are healthy. If you look at these ADPs right now on Underdog, Achane is going off the board as the RB7, Raheem Mostert as the RB28 in the 7th, and Jalen Wright as the RB47. I think when you look at the roles, Achane is not a workhorse given his size, and now with a 3rd back like Wright in the mix, will likely get a shot if Mostert gets hurt. Achane almost has no shot at being a workhorse at any point this year. So going off the board as the RB7 is definitely steep, but he has league-winning type of upside, week-winning type of upside because of how efficient he's been and how efficient he can be this year, even with a 50% snap share. He was the RB5 in points per game last year, but Raheem Mostert was the RB4 in fantasy points per game. Mostert had a 45-point outing last year as well. And given the fact that guys like Kyren Williams and Derrick Henry are going right after Achane in drafts right now, I think I might pass at this price. And one of the reasons for that is because I think I'll be trying to get Mostert, at least for the games he's healthy for. And hey, if he gets hurt or if he's washed, it is what it is at his discounted price, because he still has top 10 upside if he stays healthy, and he has top 5 weekly upside in the games that he's healthy for. Among the 23 running backs with 200 or more carries last year, he was 3rd in yards after contact per attempt and 5th in missed tackles forced per attempt. And he had one of the highest rushing yards over expectation per attempt. So I'll probably be aiming for him when I'm dipping into Miami's backfield for fantasy this year. All right, let's hit the Bengals backfield. We have Zach Moss and we have Chase Brown. I think this is a pretty ambiguous situation at the moment. Chase Brown was drafted in the 5th round last year. He was able to handle a big workload in college. He was never overly efficient, but he was solid. He had some big plays last year, so there's some excitement here for him with Joe Mixon gone. They did quickly add Zach Moss to this backfield, and it's very possible this ends up being a 1-2 punch. Zach Moss was a bell cow with Jonathan Taylor out last year, and it's worth noting that he was pretty good. He was 5th among all qualifying running backs in rushing yards over expectation per attempt. He had similar elusivity numbers to Chase Brown last year, but maintained that efficiency with 100 more carries. Neither of these backs stand out as a pass catcher, and in a pass-first offense, the guy who's likely to get more receptions is the one on the field running routes on early downs. And if I had to guess right now, I think that's Zach Moss. If I had to guess who will be the more explosive player, that will likely be Chase Brown. I don't love Moss's price tag as the RB26 off the board. That kind of assumes that he's the guy. And I think that price for that assumption is pretty steep. I think this is one of the most ambiguous backfields in the league at this point. And if you look at the running backs being taken around him, DeAndre Swift, Jalen Warren, James Conner, Raheem Mostert, Tony Pollard, I'd much rather take shots on those guys in that range. Chase Brown's price is sitting at the RB36. That's also a little steep for me. Brian Robinson, Tyjae Spears, Gus Edwards are going right before him. Now, once these guys are off the board, maybe I'll think about it, but I'm just not so interested in this backfield at these prices. It might be a full avoid for me. I think I'd rather reach and take someone like Jerome Ford, who's sitting at RB41, given Nick Chubb's injury. All right, moving on. What do we do with the Cowboys backfield? We have a seriously washed Zeke Elliott, who did have some decent fantasy games last year when he was called upon, but he was extremely inefficient. Dead last in missed tackles forced per attempt, close to last in both yards after contact per attempt and rushing yards over expectation per attempt. And we have Rico Dowdle, who's most famous for vulturing Tony Pollard at the worst possible times last year. He had some nice plays, but Rico isn't anything special either. He doesn't make guys miss, but he was solid after contact last year, and we did see him vulture some goal line opportunities from Pollard last year. I won't be touching Zeke's price as the RB40, and I probably won't be grabbing Rico Dowdle either at his RB43 price tag, because I'd rather grab guys like Jerome Ford, Kendre Miller, Marshawn Lloyd at similar prices. This is a pass-first offense, and we couldn't get much out of Tony Pollard last year, despite him actually being a good running back in the second half of the year. I'm just not sure we'll be getting a whole lot of consistent fantasy points out of this backfield from one player. We know it's going to be a split, and the Cowboys are just telling the league that they don't care who their running back is and that all they want to do is throw the rock. All right, moving on to the Chargers running back room. This is an interesting one. They brought the band back together. Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins both reunited with their former offensive coordinator Greg Roman when they were on the Ravens. He's a run-first guy. And we can safely say the same thing about Jim Harbaugh. These two actually coached together in the same capacity in San Francisco from 2011 to 2013, and here's how they ranked. 31st, 31st, and 32nd in pass attempts per game, and 3rd, 7th, and 3rd in rushing attempts per game. When Greg Roman was OC in Buffalo, he had his offense run the second least pass attempts with the second most rushing attempts. When he was in Baltimore from 2019 to 2022, he ranked 32nd, 9th, and 28th in pass attempts. The season that they were 9th, by the way, that was a season that both Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins tore their ACLs right before the season. In those 4 seasons, his offense ranked 1st, 3rd, and 7th in rushing attempts. Jim Harbaugh also consistently didn't have any teams that were pass first during his college coaching career. Moral of the story, this is going to be a run first team, and we need to target these Chargers running backs. But which one? Gus Edwards is going off the board as their RB35, their 6th round pick Kamani Vidal is going off the board as the RB51, and J.K. Dobbins as the RB56. Off the bat, I want to eliminate J.K. Dobbins from my draft board. Why? Because he's coming off an Achilles tear. We just haven't seen any success stories of a running back coming off that injury in year 1 and performing well, let alone year 2 or year 3. I hate to say it because I love the player, but I'm out on J.K. Dobbins this year. That leaves Gus Edwards and Kamani Vidal. I do think that Edwards' price tag as the RB35 is an absolute bargain, and I'll be reaching for him earlier than that anytime I have a 0 RB build this time of year. But just in general, I think that's an amazing price. I think his coaching staff trust him. They brought him in early, and I think he's the clear lead in the backfield as of right now. And I think he's going to be their clear goal line back. Just so you know, Gus is dealing with an unknown injury right now and should be ready for camp. So expect his ADP to fall a bit until he's ready to go. All that being said, there are a few things that can work against Edwards this offseason besides the injury. Gus wasn't overly efficient last year. He's 29 years old, and I believe Kamani Vidal is no slouch. I think Vidal is going to be the one, not J.K. Dobbins, in my opinion, to really challenge Edwards. He didn't play in the Power 5, but among the 174 running backs with at least 500 career carries in college, he ranked 10th and 37th in yards after contact and missed tackles forced per attempt. He's a good pass protector as well, so Vidal going off the board as RB51, he's someone I would be targeting in a backfield that will run a ton, with the only competition being someone who's never had more than 200 carries in a single season. So if I miss out on Edwards, I'll be aiming for Vidal at his price. But there's a back who's going around Vidal right now who I'm also targeting, and I'll get to him a little later. Here's another sneaky target. Okay, and this is all speculation. I'm going to give credit to Scott Barrett on this one. He planted the idea in my head, and now I can't get it out. What if Dameon Pierce gets traded to LA? He was great until Bobby Slowick took over and changed his schemes up on them, right? Pierce couldn't get anything going at all last year. Devin Singletary ended up taking over that backfield. What if he gets traded to the Chargers? He can go crazy. Like, just a fun thing to talk about, but I just can't get it out of my head now. Thanks, Scott. Hey guys, before I go on to the next team, if you could hit like on this video, if you could subscribe to the channel, that would mean the world to me. I would really, really appreciate it. Now, when I look at the Steelers backfield this year, I just see a lot of success. They have a run-first offensive coordinator in Arthur Smith. They drastically improved their offensive line, and they have a couple of productive running backs, one of them being one of the most efficient in the NFL. And no, it's not Najee Harris. Among qualifying running backs on a per-carry basis, Jaylen Warren was number 1 in yards after contact, number 1 in missed tackles forced, number 3 in rushing yards over expectation, only behind Christian McCaffrey and Devon Achane. Najee Harris had 100 more attempts than Warren did last year, and he was actually relatively solid efficiency-wise. Nothing stood out, but he wasn't bad. And with a better overall situation this year, this entire backfield gets lifted. ADP-wise, between these two is pretty close. Najee's the RB20, Warren's the RB25, and they're being picked about 5 picks from each other. Here's the thing about how Arthur Smith handled Atlanta's backfield last year. Even though I believe Tyler Algier is a solid running back, the talent gap between him and Bijan Robinson was pretty large, mainly because Bijan is an outlier type of talent. The Steelers backfield doesn't have that, right? And the more efficient running running back is actually the backup in this case. So if Arthur Smith was willing to keep the touches in that backfield so close, Bijan only had 28 more carries than Algier had last year. What is he going to do in the Steelers backfield when the talent gap isn't so big? And if anything, the backup in Pittsburgh has a bigger case to be on the field than Algier did. Because of that, I prefer to take Warren at the cheaper price because there's a decent chance that the touches are distributed a lot more evenly this year than last year. Not only that, but Warren was one of only 8 running backs last year to earn 70 targets, and among those running backs, he was third in yards per route run. He also averaged more fantasy points per game than Najee did last year. If the touch gap decreases, I think Warren over Najee at the slightly cheaper price will be the right decision. Which running back should we be targeting in the Giants backfield? Devin Singletary has a lot of experience in Brian Daboll's offense from his days in Buffalo, so he's the guy to beat in this backfield. The competition behind him doesn't look so bad to start, but this rookie Tyrone Tracy, he's someone to keep an eye out for. The word is that Tracy is already taking first team reps and he's making a push to be the team's passing down running back. This would make sense because he was a former wide receiver before he converted to running back very recently. And in the short period he was a running back for in college, he was very efficient on a per carry basis, ranking 14th in yards after contact and 5th in missed tackles forced. And this is among 600 qualifying Power 5 running backs. He's a big play guy, and with the Giants offense desperately looking for playmakers, he might be someone they look to. I don't love Devin Singletary's RB32 price tag. You have Brian Robinson, Tajay Spears, Gus Edwards going right after him. So give me Tyrone Tracy as the RB60 off the board, barely being drafted. That's a price I'm willing to pay to take a shot that the rookie hits. Otherwise, I'm perfectly fine avoiding this backfield. Let's talk about the Commanders backfield. You have Brian Robinson Jr. and Austin Eckler. This is almost a guaranteed timeshare, but which one should we target? You look at Eckler's ADP and you're like, man, RB38, why not take the shot? He was a first round pick last year. Well, the market is saying that he's washed. And according to efficiency metrics, I'm afraid that might be the case, at least in the run game. I'm expecting Brian Robinson Jr. to be the guy on early downs, and Eckler will still likely mix in for his receiving skills. I just don't think that Eckler will provide a whole lot of fantasy value in that type of limited role with a rushing quarterback who will be less likely to check it down than to tuck and run. Give me Brian Robinson at his RB33 price tag over Eckler. He was very good after contact last year. He'll have more open lanes with Jaden Daniels being a threat with his legs. And you have Cliff Kingsbury running a faster paced offense this year after them having one of the slowest offenses last year. Kingsbury's Cardinals offenses were also consistently in the top 10 in rushing yards and touchdowns. Now, this offense is projected to be bottom 7 in overall scoring this year, so something will have to give. But I think we could see an offense that will heavily rely on the legs of both Robinson and Jaden Daniels. All right, what are we doing with the Titans backfield? It really seems like these coaches are excited about both of these guys in the receiving game, which is definitely something we want to hear. But do we target Tony Pollard at RB29 or Tajay Spears at RB34? This is probably one of the toughest backfields to decipher, but we also know that this is definitely going to be a split. Now, even if I choose the second half of the year for Pollard when he was a lot better, Tajay Spears was still more efficient than him in both missed tackles forced and yards after contact. We saw how brutal Pollard was on the goal line last year. He was definitely unlucky there at times, but I'm not counting out Tajay to compete for that role. And then if I had to choose who the primary receiving back will be, I'm going with Tajay once again. He earned 70 targets as a rookie. He was on the field a ton when Tennessee was chasing points last year, which Vegas is projecting them to do a ton of again this year as the 5th lowest projected scoring team for 2024. Give me Tajay Spears at the cheaper price. What the hell is going on in the Broncos backfield? We have Javonte Williams, a new rookie in Audric Estime, Jaleel McLaughlin. The assumption is that Samaje Perine will be cut or traded, and now the head coach is also hyping up rookie Blake Watson. I think if Javonte Williams can look like his old self 2 years removed from a very rough injury, his RB31 price tag will be a bargain, especially considering what Sean Payton's offenses do for fantasy running backs. His backfields, just as a side note, Sean Payton's backfields as a whole, no matter who's back there, produce for fantasy. This tweet from Scott Barrett shows it all. Top 6 finishes in 10 of 12 seasons. However, what if he doesn't get back to that point? We haven't seen it at any point last year, so Javonte becomes a little risky for that reason, but also given the fact that they just drafted Audric Estime, who I like a lot personally, and the fact that they have a running back in Jaleel McLaughlin, who is getting a ton of steam right now, but for good reason. On a per attempt basis among qualifying running backs last year, 4th in missed tackles forced, 3rd in yards after contact, and he was really good in the pass pass game too. Among qualifying running backs, he was first in targets per route run, third in yards per route run. No team targeted their running backs more than the Broncos last year, and that's a theme with Sean Payton's offenses, who were consistently in the top 5 in targets to the running back position. And we're talking like 8 years straight. So McLaughlin could be in for a big year too, and he's going off the board as the RB52. I'm most definitely targeting him there, and if Javonte is truly not the same, you gotta expect Audric Estime to create some sort of competition as the thumper, to be that primary early down guy. Sean Payton already called him that early down back, and he's going off the board as the RB68. So if I want to avoid that risk and try to hit on some values, I think McLaughlin and Estime, and it could very well turn into what looks like a 4 or 5 man competition right now to a 2-man backfield when it's all said and done. Alright guys, that's going to do it for this episode. If you could just hit like on this video, hit subscribe, that would mean the world to me. Appreciate you. See you next time.